Arizona Attorney General Tom Horne Skyping in from the state capital of Phoenix to visit with us now. General, we appreciate you joining us again this morning on America's Forum.
It's great to be with you, JD, as always.
Tom, you have argued cases before the Supreme Court. This case about cell phones and searches. Will this negatively affect law enforcement efforts in Arizona?
Yes, as you point out, I've argued cases to the U.S. Supreme Court, and for last year, I'm 2-0 in my personal arguments. This is not a case that I personally argued, but we did write the lead amicus brief. The amicus brief is a friend of court brief where we write the lead brief, and then 14 other states joined in our brief in support of the idea that they should be able to search cell phones, because the law has been very clear for many years that when you arrest someone in a lawful arrest, you're allowed to also search anything within reach of that person. And there are two reasons for that. One is obviously the safety of the officers. So you want to be sure there are no weapons, obviously, that the person can reach. But the second one is you want to be sure that evidence is preserved and that evidence can't be destroyed, hidden, or otherwise disposed of. And there was a case called United States versus Robinson in 1973, where they searched a crumpled up cigarette package and found heroin, and the U.S. Supreme Court upheld that on the grounds that it had always been the law that you can search anything within reach of the person being arrested, and things on paper could be as personal as things in a cell phone, such as diaries. They can read diaries. There was one circuit that said they couldn't read a love note that was contained within a diary, but generally speaking, they could search anything that was within reach of the person that was lawfully arrested. So it seemed to us that the real test should be how private the information is rather than the mode of information, because written information could be more private than what's on your cell phone.
Tom, you have offered historical precedents in terms of legal cases and what has gone on before in terms of reasoning, but I'm interested specifically in the situation in Arizona in the here and now. With drug cartels across the border, coming across the international border into Arizona, have cell phone searches provided valuable information in the past about dangerous criminals and cartel members?
Well, they certainly can. The cell phone records certainly can contain evidence that you can later use in prosecuting a cartel member or other people committing crimes. And that's why we submitted the brief on behalf of the state of California, the chief amicus brief, saying that the cell phone should be treated as other evidence has been treated in the past. However, the court came to a different conclusion, and their reasoning was that the cell phones contain a huge quantity of personal information, much greater than has been true in the past, that could be in a diary or other kinds of papers you might have with you. For example, showing who's bought drugs and for how much and so on. Well, obviously you'd want to preserve that and so on. Well, obviously you'd want to preserve that information. Well, that same information might be on a cell phone, and so you'd want to preserve that information as well. But the Supreme Court went the other way, because they said the quantity of information on cell phones is so much greater that that balancing the right to privacy against the law enforcement interests, they went with the right of privacy in this case, as opposed to our proposal, which should have been the nature of the information rather than the mechanism of the information. That would be the distinction.
Well, General Horne, you mentioned this. A lot of privacy advocates were very happy with the result of this ruling here. Of course, it doesn't prohibit the law enforcement officers from searching a cell phone. They do have to get a warrant. Is your concern that it could take too long to get that warrant to search the phone, and then criminal information leading to a case could be lost?
Yes, and we want to be sure that nobody could erase or dispose of the information. The Supreme Court suggested there were ways to preserve. You could take custody of the cell phone without actually looking at it until you get a warrant. You can put the cell phone into certain bags that won't take signals from the outside because there's aluminum foil protecting the phone. So they suggested there were other ways that we could protect the information until such time as we get a warrant.
Well, General Horne, we would be remiss if we did not discuss the major story unfolding along Arizona's border with Mexico, also involving Texas and other border states. When you last joined us, you said you had some action in the offing. It turned out to be a cease and desist letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson. Now, Are you prepared to move beyond that? Jay Johnson on the ground visiting some of the detention centers where these minors are housed. Is there another step that will be taken since the federal government filed suit to stop Arizona from enforcing Senate Bill 1070? Is turnabout fair play? Will you go to court to stop the feds bringing illegals into Arizona?
Well, I would say there are two parts to that question. If I need to, and if I can, I will. The need to depends on what response they give me. Now, I also went to Nogales to inspect the area where they're holding the minors, and I spoke to Border Patrol officers, and one of them told me that he thought that they were not going to send more adults. The big issue that we had was the adults that were flown from Texas to Arizona, bused to a bus station, and then just left there with summonses to appear in court in 15 days, which I'm sure they would ignore. And if, in effect, the federal government was doing the job of the coyotes by bringing illegals from the border to the inland where they could meld into the population and become illegal resident aliens. And so I was told by an officer of the Border Patrol that he thought they were not going to do that again, but I don't have an official response yet to my letter. So obviously I need an official response telling me whether they'll do it again. The second question is whether I can, and so far our research seems to indicate that in order to do it, I need a client. I can't do it just on my own. I've approached the Department of Education because what they're doing can put a burden on our schools. Possible other clients could be the Department of Health, because we don't know if people are coming in with health problems, that we don't know what the immunization practices are in Central America and so on. But I may not be able to do it myself, and so if I have a need to do it, I'm going to have to persuade the governor's office or a separate department such as the Department of Education to be a client and bring the action on their behalf.
Well, you just mentioned something there that's very important, Tom. The governor's office, Governor Jan Brewer, many people have in their mind's eye the image of Governor Brewer raising her finger to President Obama on the runway at an Arizona airport. But have you heard anything from the governor that would indicate, since technically you're her lawyer, that she is willing, when push comes to shove, to take action in the courts against the federal government?
She has also criticized, as you know, JD, has criticized the federal government for what they've done, but we haven't reached the issue of whether or not she would be willing to provide me with a client. I started out with the Department of Education, and I haven't heard back from them yet.
Well, it's curious on a couple of fronts, Tom, because we know that when it comes to calling out the National Guard, governors of the respective states could do so. So if there's a problem in Arizona, it would seem to be within the powers of the governor there, but also to initiate this action. I realize you cannot speak for the governor, but to me, it speaks volumes that there has been, if not a reluctance, then a reticence heretofore to get something done. Something else, an article in the New York Times of all publications, not exactly a publication that calls for strengthening border security, an article entitled "Snakes and Thorny Brush, Children at the Border Alone." Two questions. Number one, it is my understanding that the majority of the minors are males aged 14 to 18, but number two goes to the releases issued. I'm understanding that the children, the elementary school age or kindergarten age children, in some cases, kids at an age of 5 are given these notices to appear when they can't even read. Does that speak to the impracticality of the approach the feds are taking right now?
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. That would have been in the press, but it wasn't something that I was able to confirm or not confirm. But I think the main point is if you can fly people from Texas to Arizona, you can fly them from Texas to El Salvador or Guatemala or Honduras. And if the kids were repatriated, brought back to their mothers, if their mothers still live down there, right away, then you wouldn't have these rumors that circulated that said all you need to do is get across the river and you'll be able to stay. And you wouldn't have this massive influx. The massive influx resulted from an unduly lenient policy, and that policy had the unintended consequence that word got out that you can if you cross the river they'll let you stay, and so then you have a massive number of kids coming. What the administration needs to do is to be better about enforcing the law, processing people more quickly, and repatriating them back to their countries.
We'll leave it right there. Attorney General Tom Horne on subjects involving the Supreme Court and borders in the southwestern United States. As always, we appreciate your insights, and we'll have you back real soon.
Thanks, JD. It's great being with you.
Thank you, General. John, it continues to be a mess there on the border, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, interesting comments from Jay Johnson yesterday, and you still wonder, where is the National Guard going to factor into all this? Still a possibility.
Stay tuned. We'll be covering this story, and we're coming back here on America's Forum.